We see the Congressional App Challenge as many things, but one is something that is transforming the institution of Congress. And that sounds like quite a statement, but we really see how powerful these students' creations can be and what kind of an impact they can have on members of Congress. Members are seeing this locally. That's the important part to remember is this isn't just some high achieving students coming to the Hill to show off what they've created on behalf of a big for-profit organization's program or something like that. This is students who live in their communities, doing work to help address issues that they know exist in their communities and doing an incredible job at addressing those issues.
Hi, everybody. This is How Tech Becomes Law, a public interest tech podcast about technology, public policy, and career advice. We are your co-hosts, Jingyan Zhang and Dhruv Gupta. This week, we have a conversation with Joe Alessi, the director of the Congressional App Challenge.
Joe Alessi is the director of the Congressional App Challenge, a congressional initiative dedicated to the cultivation of future computer science talent through a series of annual coding contests hosted by members of Congress. The contest challenges middle and high school students from across the U.S. to use their knowledge and creativity to design apps that are unique to their own skills and interests. Joe is a career nonprofit management professional, having worked to transform the educational initiatives of NGOs, trade associations, and charitable foundations. Under his leadership beginning in January 2019, the Congressional App Challenge has reached record highs, increasing congressional participation by nearly 50% while doubling student engagement. Hey, Joe, thanks so much for joining us. Tell us more about what the App Challenge looks like.
Hey, well, thank you guys so much for having me today. I'm thrilled to be here. For those who aren't familiar with the program, Congressional App Challenge is an official initiative of the House of Representatives that was passed by a House resolution in 2013 and officially launched in 2015. The program is strongly bipartisan. Over 75% of members of the House of Representatives and at least one member from all 50 states hosted Congressional App Challenges in 2021. And so it's a program with enormous support with legislators on Capitol Hill. So from that perspective, incredibly exciting and something that almost every member is taking part in. It's modeled after something called the Congressional Art Competition, which has been around since, I believe, the 1970s and was created to spark a passion for the arts in students at a time where funding for the arts was being cut through budgets across the country. And this program, modeled after the art competition, is hoping to spark a passion for computer science and STEM. This is better thought of as a series of concurrent competitions, all taking place at the same time, members of Congress hosting these competitions for students across the country. They all happen during the same time period, and we celebrate the winners all during the same period each year.
Hey, that's super cool, man. Just a little bit about myself. My sister did one of these challenges, and I think she had a fantastic time. So thanks for putting this together.
So how have you seen the Congressional App Challenge, bridge that gap between technology, Congress, but also education and the students here in the U.S.?
Yeah, so the Congressional App Challenge is a really interesting initiative, and there aren't many initiatives that exist like this. Congressional App Challenge is a public-private partnership that is supported by tech organizations, big tech companies that you would think of, also some really tech-conscious foundations. It is run by a 501c3 nonprofit who I am an employee for, and it is an official function of the House of Representatives. And so really, in terms of public-private partnerships, it's a model for what can be done and how successful a program like this can be. The way the program works is every Congress, so every 2 years, the Committee on House Administration receives a letter from the Congressional Internet Caucus, and we at the Internet Education Foundation, which is the name of the organization that I am an employee of, are appointed each Congress to oversee the competition. And we do fundraising on behalf of the program to underwrite all of the costs. In a lot of ways, we are one of the programs that is a model for bridging that gap and sitting at the intersection between tech, Congress, the nonprofit world, and then also students as well, right? We know that Congress is often hearing about a lot of negatives when it comes to tech. And I think that's a lot of the headlines that get made, especially given hearings and things. Sometimes STEM and CS education are overlooked in that conversation. And there's a big focus on what's happening with professionals and not so much of a focus on what could be happening with students or what should be happening in that space. Students, especially students who are local constituents. So for members of Congress, hearing this from students who live in the communities that they represent, it really shows what's possible at home. And I think that that's what makes the program so powerful.
I mean, that kind of brings up sort of a different question. A lot of districts are just dramatically different from each other. And from what I understand, the competition happens within the district, but even within districts, you can have massive differences, right? There are folks that don't have internet access or coding classes in their schools. What do you need to participate in the Congressional App Challenge? And what's your perspective on how we can tackle that both inequality and inequity in access to education?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's such a difficult puzzle to solve. One of the ways that the Congressional App Challenge is built for some degree of equity, students are limited to competing against other students who live in their congressional district. And that's not a perfect way, as you mentioned, to break up students. There are about 800,000 people, give or take, in each congressional district around the country. And while that's, again, not a perfect way to break it up, there are certainly inequities within congressional districts. It does help flatten the playing field for students. And so that does mean that, instead of having 2 or 3 national winners who would be likely to come from the communities that you might expect, whether that's the Bay Area or New York City or the suburbs of Washington, D.C., it means that every congressional district is going to have students who are honored together alongside their other students from the places that we just previously mentioned. And so I think that that's a really important part of what we're doing with this program. It's not a perfect way to break things up, but I do think that it's helpful. What can we do to help resolve that? Well, we're a pretty small organization. I know we're called the Congressional App Challenge, and we take place in all of these different congressional districts across the country. We've got a fairly small budget here. There's 2 of us who work on this program full time, if you can believe that. And so each year we're budgeted to about $25 per student participant. That's sometimes an obstacle for us, especially when we're working so hard to break into these communities that are underrepresented within the tech fields. And so, what do we do on that front? Well, we do try to do what we can, and that means providing free training and partnering with organizations who can do live and asynchronous training for students. And then trying to make sure that that training is accessible, not just to students who already have an interest in computer science or a background or the hardware to do it, but working with organizations who make this something that's easy and accessible. During COVID, we saw that an enormous problem for many students, low-income students across the country, was that they didn't have the hardware at home to be able to do this sort of work, to take part in the Congressional App Challenge. So recently we've partnered with an organization called Replit, who I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with their work, but they allow you to code within a browser.
Really cool company.
An amazing company. And you can code an app from your mobile phone if you want. And so for students who are limited to a 4G connection, maybe they only had a tablet at home, maybe they were using their parents' smartphones to zoom into their classroom every day. That does provide an opportunity for them to get involved. And so, we do what we can to try to get students involved. That's a major focus of what we do, but we know that it goes well beyond that. It's a big country, and the Congressional App Challenge is taking part in every corner of it. So there's a lot of different solutions that need to be enacted to fix this. You mentioned in the lead up to the question that you can talk about issues of broadband access. That's a huge issue for our more rural communities. Hardware access, that tends to be an issue that is more prevalent in some of our more urban communities. And so many issues, many solutions, but definitely things that people need to be working on. This year we picked 20 what we call priority communities with students who we felt were underrepresented, not just in tech, but also within the Congressional App Challenge, to focus, do outreach and partnership with organizations that work locally in those communities to try to help to bring more students into the Congressional App Challenge and give them an opportunity to be honored. Ultimately, this is a legislative issue, and we think that we can shine a light locally for Congress, so members of Congress can see what's possible in their district, and we hope that that provides members of Congress with the desire and the impetus to make sure that they're funding the types of programs that can help level the playing field for students across the country.
One of the interesting things that I've seen with the Congressional App Challenge is sort of how much you all do to bring students together and then help them kind of inspire each other as like a community. How have you kind of used that as an impact on maybe getting more folks that wouldn't otherwise be interested in STEM excited about STEM, and showing them role models or folks that maybe look like them or from their area to get excited about STEM as well?
Yeah, the power of this competition is that we have hundreds of winners every year. And so the Congressional App Challenge, it's open to teams. So teams of up to 4 students can compete. They do have to be enrolled in middle or high school, but they can form a team to compete. As we mentioned, this year, 340 members of Congress hosted Congressional App Challenges. Our average team size is about 2. We presume we're going to have about 700 Congressional App Challenge winners in 2021. And that's 700 opportunities for students around the country, as a matter of the way the program's built, from geographically different places to be honored together by Congress under the dome of the Capitol. That is an amazing opportunity for any student who gets to take part in it. I know you mentioned your sister was a previous participant, a previous winner. She had the opportunity, I believe, to come to DC to take part in what we call our House of Code celebration, which is our chance for students to show off their winning apps to legislators, to hear keynote speeches from leading lawmakers and from other voices in the STEM fields, and to spend time with one another. And ultimately, that is so powerful, having those students, giving them the chance to travel to DC with their families, to see the power of what they've created and the network that they've just entered. I think it's incredibly energizing. And so we love that we're capable, we're able to honor this many students. And we think that's an incredibly important part of what we do.
Yeah, for what it's worth, my sister had a blast.
I'm glad to hear it.
Can you talk a little more just about the actual things that students have built for the Congressional App Challenge? I believe actually this year's App Challenge just recently wrapped up as well. So if you want to highlight some really interesting projects that you saw from this year as well.
Yeah. So this year's Congressional App Challenge just recently wrapped up, and we're just working through all the applications now. We received over 2,000 applications for this year's competition, which is incredibly exciting.
Wow, congratulations!
Yeah, it's our second highest year ever, and so we're incredibly excited about what these students have created. Ultimately, for students to get involved, they can code apps on any topic. They can code them for any platform. They can use any coding language. And so the program's really open-ended. We're interested in sparking a passion for computer science within students. And so we don't want to stifle them by giving them an assignment that might not be something that they're interested in or passionate about. We want them to go out and find issues that they care about and code something that they care about. And so each year, overwhelmingly, what we see is students are creating civic-minded apps that solve problems in their community. And each year, the best apps that we see are always the apps that solve a hyper-local problem that a student saw in their community and said, you know what, I can do work to help fix this, right? Last year, we saw over 50% of our apps addressed issues that were created by COVID-19. And that makes sense in 2020. But over half the apps that we received this last year from students, they were addressing issues directly caused by COVID. So we saw social distancing apps, we saw apps to help check students into school safely, but we also saw indirect issues. So we saw a lot of apps around donation. So people who were having trouble with hunger and trying to pair them with people who could help find them groceries. Speaking of hunger, helping the elderly and other immunocompromised folks be able to receive delivery of groceries on a volunteer basis safely. And apps like that, I think, really speak to the type of program that this is and the type of things that students are creating. So those are the apps that really speak to us each year. And we're just getting through some of the apps from this year's challenge right now. I'll tell you, I've taken a look at about 70 or 80 so far, and they've all been really excellent. So excited to work through the rest.
That's awesome. That's super cool. And I mean, one thing that kind of stands out to me is the Congressional App Challenge to some extent feels like a live suggestion box where folks are saying, hey, this is a problem. I'm trying to come up with a solution for it, but I'm trying to tell others too that I'm having this problem and I've got this solution for it. How does that sort of translate into maybe policy or broader conversations around what solutions folks are looking for and what problems they're trying to solve?
Yeah. So we see the Congressional App Challenge as many things, but one is something that is transforming the institution of Congress. And that sounds like quite a statement, but we really see how powerful these students' creations can be and what kind of an impact they can have on members of Congress. Members are seeing this locally. That's the important part to remember is this isn't just some high achieving students coming to the Hill to show off what they've created on behalf of a big for-profit organization's program or something like that. This is students who live in their communities, doing work to help address issues that they know exist in their communities and doing an incredible job at addressing those issues. And so one of the things that we always hear from lawmakers is they're so impressed with how high quality a lot of the submissions that they receive are. And they say, well, I knew students were interested in my district in computer science, and I knew that they had an interest in these issues, but we had no idea that they'd be able to create something that was seemingly professional. And I think that goes a long way in transforming how members see what's possible when it comes to tech. Since the launch of the Congressional App Challenge, mentions of computer science in Congress and official hearings have increased something like 100% or like 100 times. And, look, that's not all our work. There are lots of other organizations that are doing this work as well. But you can tell that this is very much on the forefront of thinking of members and of what's going on legislatively. And we see ourselves as the leading edge in that movement.
Can you talk a little more about what the relationships that's been formed as a result of the Congressional App Challenge has meant? Both, I'm thinking in terms of the students amongst themselves when they, come to DC and the being from all over the country and then being able to actually meet like-minded peers that are actually interested in similar things as them that they may not see in their own schools, especially in more remote areas, but also as well as when you have a bunch of middle schoolers and high schoolers show up in Congress, which is not known for being necessarily the youngest cohort in America, what those kind of relationships has been like in terms of the kind of messages and the kind of relationships that form between members of Congress and the students in their districts.
Every year I'm struck by how interested the students are to spend time with one another. And when we hold our event in person, House of Code, when we see students together at the Capitol with their families, meeting people, making friends, you can tell that these relationships are long lasting, that they're beginning to build a network that's gonna go well beyond their participation in this program. We have something called an alumni advisory board, which is made up of students who are currently enrolled in college, who are studying STEM fields, and who had previously participated in the Congressional App Challenge when they were in middle or high school. They help us on a number of different projects, and they're an incredible force. And one of the things that was amazing is that some of them remembered meeting each other at House of Code 2 or 3 years prior. Those networks never fail to amaze me. I'll find students who are now going on to do amazing things, launching their own startups. And we could not get the students to leave the student demonstrations last year. They spent hours chatting with each other, talking about, how did you guys build this? What are you going to build next? Exchanging information. They started their own Discord server at the end of last year. I think in terms of a student-to-student participation, it's really, that's incredible to see each year. Now, when it comes to students and members, you're right, there's an enormous age gap, especially with, we've got lots of sitting members of Congress who were in their 80s and many high profile members who were above what the traditional American retirement age is. And so I do think that there's a real contrast there. And, at the end of the day, virtually every student who can participate in the Congressional App Challenge is not currently eligible to vote. Providing this platform an opportunity to speak directly to their members, to message to what's important to them. Members of Congress are reviewing these apps personally, and we see that each year. And so to be able to not just create something because you're interested in coding and maybe be honored for it, but to get this message across directly to your member of Congress, I think that that's such a rare opportunity, especially for such young people. And some of the best ideas that we've seen, obviously come out of the last few decades have been, by and large, young people making change. And so we think that that's one of the most powerful parts of this program. And every year, it never fails to amaze us how how much impact these apps have on the members themselves.
So shifting gears for a little bit, in your experience and sort of in seeing the challenge overall, how has it influenced the paths that students are taking, both when they go to college or for other education after high school, and as well as in their careers for those who did the App Challenge a number of years ago?
Yeah, so we've got an incredibly young cohort of students who are what we call our App Challenge alumni. We launched in 2015, and that means that if you were a high school senior in 2015 and you participated in the program, then you might be about a year and a half out of college right now. And so we've got some young professionals in our cohort, but not a ton. For the most part, our students are either still enrolled in high school or currently working their way through university. This is an incredible resource for most students. It's the most prestigious prize in student computer science. And it looks amazing on a college resume. And so we know a lot of students, that's why they apply to the program. And I think there's a lot of benefit just there, especially if they're honored as a winner in their district. This competition, I think it's fair to say, has done an amazing job inspiring students to study STEM fields once they enter university. We were just looking at our early exit poll numbers from the 2021 Congressional App Challenge. 94% of the students say the Congressional App Challenge has made them more likely to study a STEM field when they go to college. And so that's, I think, an incredible testament to the type of work that we're doing here. We survey our alumni each year, and in our most recent alumni survey, 88% of the students reporting let us know that they're currently studying a STEM field if they're enrolled in college. And so that's a huge conversion rate. And of that, 70% of those students have gone on to study CS. And so we're seeing a lot of students really take these opportunities, this experience, and turn it into a vision for what their future could be. We've been working hard to create a network for students, this alumni network that we're currently building with so many young but inspiring folks who want to go on to do amazing things in the not just in the tech space, but in the civic good space too. And so, we're trying to create this network where students can share ideas, they can collaborate, they can troubleshoot, and they can lean on each other. And so as they move from a cohort of students who are working their way through university to a cohort of young professionals who are building companies and trying to change lives and change the world, we hope that we'll provide a space for them to be able to lean on each other.
I wanted to ask, looking at your career, didn't think you'd be in STEM, huh?
Yeah.
How'd you get involved?
Yeah. So my background, you're right. My background's not in STEM. My background is in building educational programs for nonprofits, NGOs. My degree is in government and politics. And so for a long time, I had hoped to work in politics. That was my goal when I was an undergraduate. And I graduated college in 2011, which was not a great time in terms of the job market. There are a lot of structural barriers that are in place even today for people who are interested in getting into politics or working on the Hill. Those, really limit who can and who cannot take the low-paying or non-paid jobs that are requisite to become somebody who is involved in legislation or working on the Hill. And so that was a big struggle for me. Is that something that I had hoped to do basically all my life? I found I didn't have the financial resources available to me to take unpaid or low paid work for a long enough period of time to break through and work as a congressional staffer with a member of Congress. And so that was obviously quite a disappointment when that reality came to bear after I graduated college in 2011. I was fortunate to find an organization, a trade association that worked with construction managers that was interested in taking a chance on me and paying a full-time salary to me to do professional development training and basically heading up their young professionals program. At the time, I didn't have any background in program building or educational programming, but I think they had a sense that I was enthusiastic about the work that they were doing and I could be an asset to them. I do not have a background in construction management or engineering either. And so that was quite a learning curve as well. But I found that I really took to the work very quickly and that I enjoyed the prospect of building programs like this. And so since that time, I have jumped from one program to another. usually working with young professionals, college students. In this case, I'm currently working with middle and high school students, which is incredibly rewarding. And that's an enormous part of what makes day to day my work fulfilling. I should also maybe mention I was honored by NASA in seventh grade. I didn't study STEM field in college. However, I did take part in a program around the launch of the International Space Station. I was invited to the Smithsonian. I had an opportunity to meet John Glenn, who's obviously was an astronaut as well as
That's so cool.
senator. Yeah, it was very, very cool. And that was really inspirational for me. Now, I use that as inspiration to want to get involved in politics, but a lot of the students who were there went on to, continue to be passionate about engineering and aerospace. And so I understood when I was presented with the opportunity to join the Congressional App Challenge team, just how transformational a program like this could be for students who maybe hadn't considered this, computer science or STEM fields as a career path that would be viable for them.
Have you seen any kind of other impacts from the Congressional App Challenge in terms of inspiring students, even if they don't study STEM, to be wanting to maybe go to law school and be able to influence the policies that Congress has a say on, or go be community organizers or advocates, or other ways of sort of taking their knowledge and their experiences to shape the future of this country?
Yeah, we see a lot of civic focused engagement from our students when they participate, and that does not abate after they finish getting involved in the program. And so the number of students who have gone on to campaign for members, that they maybe had an experience with, who, they're a member of Congress who they like, or have gone on to take on issues nationally or work through other civic engagement issues that really speak to them. I think there's been so much of that within this program, which has been really amazing to see. And, obviously we don't have any students who are old enough yet to run for Congress. I think you could be about 23 if you were the oldest congressional out challenger we had, which means that person is maybe only 2 years away from being eligible to launch a run for the House of Representatives. One thing we're incredibly excited about over the next decade is to see how many of these students go on to look to have a political career. And we don't think we're that far away from a scenario where a sitting member of Congress is a previous Congressional App Challenge winner, which would be an incredibly exciting moment for the program. And obviously something that will be really inspirational for students for a long time to come.
That's awesome. I might vote for him. Cool. So, hey, Joe, I also hear that you've got a podcast coming up for the Congressional App Challenge. Tell us where we can learn more about it.
Yeah, that's actually something we're very excited to be announcing very soon. We've got our Alumni Advisory Board is going to be launching an official Congressional App Challenge podcast called Debugged. Our first episode should be released here in mid-November, something we're incredibly excited about. You can find more information about Debugged, about our Alumni Advisory Board, and about the Congressional App Challenge by going to congressionalappchallenge.us.
Just to wrap up here, the question that we ask all of our guests is, this podcast, of course, is called How Tech Becomes Law. And given your experience, would love to hear about your thoughts around the technology and how its design has created new rules for how society operates.
Yeah, that's I think a great question. There's a lot of different ways that you could approach it. One issue that's been top of mind for us, obviously because it's affected the way that we've worked, but also the way that we've needed to think about the program, is the impact that remote work is currently having and is going to continue to have, on the American workplace. And so during COVID-19, I think it was pretty clear that many people were working remotely. A lot of organizations are still working remotely. Congress is back to working in person. We are still in a remote capacity here at the Congressional App Challenge. That's something that without technology would have been impossible to consider even 10 years ago. When I started my first job that I mentioned earlier, the trade association in 2012, I didn't have a laptop computer to bring home. I had a desktop. And so when we had snow days, I wasn't working those days. So even 10 years ago, I think it would have been really difficult to envision this transition to remote work, let alone 30 years ago. With that said, obviously, I think that a lot of the technology that underlays the ability to work remotely kept white collar professionals at home, safe and working through 2020. There's some questions of equity there, right? Not everybody, in fact, most people did not have the opportunity to work from the comfort of their home all the way through 2020. And many folks had to trudge back out in the workplace. And so that's not to say that this is going to be something that is transformed everybody's day to day. But I think for a lot of industries, including ours, it's been an incredible help to allow us to continue to do our work, and is transitioning into, I think, a big question about what the future of the workplace is going to look like. Most workers, at least in all the surveys that I've seen, report not particularly being interested in returning to the office in a full-time capacity. And certainly I can understand why that is. There are a lot of really positives that come with not having to commute every day, to be able to be at home, to be closer to family. And so, we also think that there's some potential that this means that job seekers will not need to leave their communities for superstar cities and expensive places where you might need to have, the financial resources and backing to get an apartment and deal with the cost of living. You won't necessarily need to do that. You won't need to leave home or leave your community that you love and you'd like to serve, just to go work for a big tech organization that's going to pay you a lot of money, right? So we're hoping that there's a flattening of the playing field that ends up coming out of this. Give everyone an opportunity to have these pathway to middle-class jobs that we know are out there in the tech and the CS spaces, and do that where they're comfortable and where they'd like to live their lives with the people they'd like to live them with.
Absolutely. Well, hey, Joe, thanks so much for joining, and thank you for listening. I'm Dhruv Gupta with Jinyan Zhang, and this was How Tech Becomes Law.
Thanks for listening to How Tech Becomes Law. We are supported by the Public Interest Tech Lab. You can find us online at howtechbecomeslaw.org and on social media channels at Tech Becomes Law. The music for this podcast was produced by Clarence Yap. If you enjoyed this podcast, please leave us a review on your podcast platform of choice. It really helps other listeners discover us. Thanks again for listening, and come back next week for another conversation on how tech becomes law.